Tickety-Boo News. So one of the things that I keep reading about, and I read a book, I finished a book over the weekend that I'm going to talk about tomorrow under Stuff I Like, that was one of these books. But I'm hearing again and again intellectuals who are saying that they understand that the West is in trouble and Europe is actually collapsing because of the disconnect from Christianity. And yet, as intellectuals, they just can't believe. And the sense that we always get from our elites is that the world is secularizing. It's only a matter of time before we do without God. Fewer and fewer people are going to churches. The churches of Europe are empty, and so on and so forth. I read a couple of articles this week that really brought that into question. Glenn Stanton over at The Federalist quotes a research paper by scholars at Harvard University and Indiana University at Bloomington, who wrote this piece, and I'm reading from the abstract of the actual research. It says, recent research argues that the United States is secularizing, that this religious change is consistent with the secularization thesis, and that American religion is not exceptional. But we show that rather than religion fading into irrelevance, as the secularization thesis would suggest, intense religion, strong affiliation, very frequent practice, literalism, and evangelicalism is persistent. And in fact, only moderate religion is on the decline in the United States. We also show that in comparable countries, intense religion is on the decline or already at very low levels. And this is an absolute truth, that the decline, what they call the decline of religion, is actually the decline of liberal religion. It's actually the decline of religion that can't stand up for itself and say what it has to say. And you know, religion doesn't have to be hateful, even though it does sometimes draw borders around moral activity. Somebody wrote to me on Facebook the other day and said, how do you feel about gay marriage? And I said, well, it's nice of you to ask, but I'm already married, because I actually don't think that religion is about, that the Christian religion, Christianity specifically, is about condemning other people or telling other people what they should be doing. It is about finding what God's sacrifice means in your life and finding your way forward and becoming the kind of person who lives the way God wants him to live and does it almost naturally. Another article was called, Is There a Christian Revival Starting in France? This was from the paper The Week, and it was by Pascal Emmanuel Gobry. And he says, yes, churches in the French countryside are desperately empty. There are no young people there, but then there are no young people in the French countryside, period. France is a modern country with an advanced economy, and that means its countryside is emptied, and that means the church is built in an era when the country's sociological makeup was quite different. Go empty. But he says, my wife and I now live in an upper crust neighborhood with all the churches full of upwardly mobile professionals. When we were penniless grad students, we lived in a working class neighborhood, and on Sunday, our church was packed with immigrant families and hipster gentrifiers. It was only recently that I was struck by the fact that imperceptibly, the majority of my college and grad school friends who are Christmas and Easter Catholics, when we met, now report going to church every Sunday and praying regularly. If you are a regular listener to the show, you know that I've been predicting for a long time that there will be a rebirth of Christianity from the top, because for two reasons. One is that the arguments against it are collapsing. Relativism, the arguments that have come to replace it, relativism, multiculturalism, these are collapsing. They are inherently, internally contradictory, and so they don't make any sense. But the other thing is that for a long period of time, hundreds of years, the discovery of science actually operated maybe not logically, but apparently against religion. So everything, when you started to explain that, no, God doesn't come and with his finger move the planets around, but they move in a certain way, or, that there are rules to science, it begins to seem, well, everything will be explained. Now we know that the brain does certain things, the brain will explain everything. And so we don't need God anymore. But in fact, science at the top and bottom is bottoming out into a new kind of science. And I'm not trying to prove God through science. I think that's ridiculous. But I'm just saying that there's a new kind of science, including quantum physics, in which the perception of the observer changes the phenomenon. And when you start to realize that the logic of big life doesn't necessarily hold at the extreme levels of life, you start to realize that a lot of what's in the gospel makes sense. If the will of a person can change the state of nature, then the will of a special person, a godly person, might really change things to the point where he could heal, walk on water, actually triumph over death. All these things become more possible and may even help explain some of the things that science the scientists are actually confused about, the presence of an overarching will, a God, might actually answer some of the questions. And this is not God of the gaps, this is God of science that might answer some of these questions. The fact is, Christianity, at least as I understand it, makes perfect sense. I live in a world that has an underlying supernatural aspect, but I do not live in a world of superstition. I do not live in a world of magic. All of those things, I think I was more superstitious before I became a Christian. You know, with Christ, a lot of times, I think actually Jesus says something like this: it's not that seeing is believing, it's believing is seeing. That when you embrace Christ, God through Christ, you start to realize one of my biggest fears was that I would become less realistic. I have, in fact, become more realistic. And I think that that is a sign that God is not metaphorical. I shouldn't say that. All things are metaphorical. Language itself is metaphorical, and flesh is a metaphor for the spirit, and God in flesh is a metaphor for himself. And so it is metaphorical, but that doesn't mean it didn't literally happen. I think when a metaphor is that perfect, when it describes the world that well, I think there's every chance that the metaphor itself is literally real. And so I just think that there's reason behind religion that does not back the reason of elite, secularism and relativism. And I think keep watching these signs, because I'm telling you, this thing is coming. It's going to be a wave. It's going to come from intellectuals as well as ordinary people. And if it's happening in France, one of the least religious countries in the West, it will soon be happening everywhere. So that's good news. Tickety-Boo news. All right. Tomorrow we have Andy Weir is with us, right?
Well, he's going to run next week. Tomorrow we have Henry Olsen.
Oh, we have Henry Olsen. Great. Henry Olsen, one of the great electoral observers. We'll talk to him about the midterms and the elections coming up and how things are going for both the GOP and the Democrats. So that should be interesting. I'm Andrew Klavan. This is The Andrew Klavan Show. I'll see you then. The Andrew Klavan Show is produced by Robert Sterling. Executive producer, Jeremy Boring. Senior producer, Jonathan Hay. Our supervising producer is Mathis Glover. Technical producer, Austin Stevens. Edited by Alex Zingaro. Audio is mixed by Mike Cormina. Hair and makeup is by Jesua Alvera. And our animations are by Cynthia Angulo and Jacob Jackson. The Andrew Klavan Show is a Daily Wire Forward Publishing production. Copyright Forward Publishing 2018.